Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Michelle Yaw, Senior, Georgetown College, Mark Mealy, Vice President for Policy, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak.
Selamat Sejahtera, Perdana Menteri Malaysia, Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Sri Muhammad Najib bin Tun Abdul Razak, Datin Paduka Sri Rosma Mansor, Delegasi Malaysia, tatamu yang mulia, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, selamat datang ke University Georgetown. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Georgetown University community, our honored guests, and fellow students. It is truly an honor to host you, Mr. Prime Minister, here at Georgetown University. We are deeply grateful that you have taken the time to come to travel to Washington, D.C. on your visit to the United States. On behalf of the Georgetown University Lecture Fund, I would also like to extend our warmest welcome to the Prime Minister's wife, Datin Sri Rosma Mansor, and their family. We would also like to thank the Malaysian delegation, including the Minister of Education, senior U.S. government officials, and honored guests for joining us for the Prime Minister's public appearance in Washington. Tonight, we are very excited to have Prime Minister Najib Razak speak to us, as he is not only Georgetown's first head of government visit in 2014, but he's also a Georgetown father, and a proud one too. During Lecture Fund's kickoff event, we are hearing about the future of Asia, governance, security, and growth in a multipolar world from a person who will play a crucial role in shaping this future. In 1976, at the age of 23, Datuk Sri Najib became the youngest person to be elected to the parliament in Malaysia's history, and has since served in the Malaysian government in multiple crucial posts. This includes the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports, Minister of Defense, Minister of Education, and the Finance Minister. He was elected as President of the United Malays National Organization, or UMNO, and then elected Prime Minister in 2009. This will be the Prime Minister's 5th year leading Malaysia in a journey of transformation in a multiracial and multi-religious context. In a few months, Malaysia is to chair the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also known as ASEAN, and is currently lobbying for a non-permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. The Lecture Fund is also grateful to have Vice President Policy of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, Mr. Mark Mealy, joining in today's conversation. Mr. Mealy is a leading expert on Malaysia, having served as the Senior Director for Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei Affairs, as well as coordinator of the Council's ASEAN Financial Services Working Group. He will be leading a short conversation with the Prime Minister's after the Prime Minister's remarks, which will be followed by a question and answer session. As a student-led organization dedicated to encouraging dialogue on Georgetown University's campus, the Lecture Fund would also like to thank the Office of the President, as well as the Asian Studies Department and the SFS for making this event possible. We will be opening applications for the Lecture Fund Board at midnight tonight on our website. And without further ado, please, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Mr. Prime Minister Najib Razak to the podium.
Thank you, Michelle, for your warm remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, all the Hoyas. I am very pleased to join you this evening and to be here at this historic university, especially in this wonderful hall. You couldn't have chosen a better place. The influence of this 100-acre campus is felt right across the globe. Georgetown has produced a remarkable number of leaders in business, government, and world affairs. And I'm sure many of you will follow in their footsteps. But I understand one needs to tread carefully in Georgetown. My daughter and son, Lorena, who went to Georgetown, School for Foreign Service, tell me that in order to graduate, under no circumstances must one walk over the university seal outside Healy Hall. And also, great care must be taken when navigating the exorcist steps. I think we all know about that. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to address you this evening and to speak about a subject that will be part of your professional lives. For you are one of the first generations in many years who will live and work in a multipolar world. Just as the explosive forces of European imperial power and industrial revolution shaped the 18th and 19th centuries, so the emergence of America as a sole superpower, militarily dominant and willing to remake the world economy in its image, shaped the 20th century. Emerging from Second World War with its economic and military dominance assured, the United States continued to steer the world's course, creating new institutions, from Bretton Woods to the United Nations, which supported a world order based on economic liberalism and the pursuit of broadly democratic governance. Underpinning this global leadership were the unique forces which characterized American success: deep natural and human resources, a fortuitous position in the world, a strong sense of national unity, and the relentless drive and industry of its people. Those led to an extraordinary century of influence, rooted in economic dominance and expressed through military reach. 100 years ago, as the First World War began, it was possible to speak of a multipolar world order. By the time the Second World War ended, it was not. The United States stood tallest atop a world that came to reflect its interests and ideas. That is changing. The dynamism of America's economy and its people will not, nor will the willingness to show leadership on the world stage. The United States will remain a global power throughout your lifetime, but it will not be the only one. Soon, perhaps even this year, China will overtake the United States as the world's biggest economy according to purchasing power parity. It will be a symbolic moment for both countries, but it reflects a much deeper shift. 50 years ago, Asia accounted for less than 15% of global output. Today, it is more than 40%. 50 years ago, would you believe it, South Korea's economy was smaller than Mozambique's. Today, it is almost equal to the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. 50 years ago, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia's capital, was not even classed as a city. Today, on population alone, it will rank as the 5th largest city in the United States. By the end of the decade, Asia's output will exceed that of Europe and North America put together. By 2025, India and China's combined GDP will be greater than a G7. This remarkable economic transformation has been accompanied by waves of political reform. A few decades ago, there were only a handful of free societies in Asia. Today, the Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia, amongst others, between them, home to 400 million people, have joined the growing list of Asian democracies. It's no surprise, therefore, that Asia is commanding a greater share of world attention. President Obama, who lived in Indonesia, has recalibrated his nation's strategy towards Asia. But the pivot to the Pacific is not just about one country. Russia, Australia, and the European Union all have specific policies on Asian engagement. Nor is it strictly a diplomatic phenomenon. Asian nations are attracting bright minds and big money. That may include some of you who will be drawn to Asia's dynamic cities or fast-growing regions, to the new centers of gravity, be they economic or intellectual, which are developing in our vast and diverse continent. So this evening, I would like to say a few words about Asia's future, about governance, about security, and about growth in a multipolar world. Ladies and gentlemen, there are key questions and issues that will shape Asia's near future. So in the hope of sparking some discussion, let me say a few words about each. The first question is, in the minds of so many people, of course, is the rise of China and how countries will react to it, and also how China will behave. China's explosive growth has triggered some soul-searching in capitals around the world. Aside from trying to understand and replicate China's success, observers also want to know whether China's rise will be primarily peaceful and economic or martial and assertive. Malaysia has deep historic and cultural ties to the Middle Kingdom. Centuries of Chinese immigration have changed Malaysia. 1 in 4 Malaysians is of Chinese descent, and the Baba, Nyonya, or Straits Chinese are a distinctive feature of Malaysia's culture tapestry. In the early 20th century, Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of the Republic of China, planned the revolution that ended China's last imperial dynasty from a house in Penang in northern Malaysia. And in 1974, we, Malaysia, were the first Southeast Asian nation to establish diplomatic ties with the People's Republic. We have seen firsthand the astonishing economic development which has propelled China to its current heights. We have seen how the fruits of China's growth can be shared and how the changes in China's economy have opened up new opportunities for its neighbors and partners. We have seen that a China, and a China that pursues peace, stability, and mutual development, is an invaluable partner for developed and developing countries alike. We welcome the peaceful rise of China. The second question concerns the role of the United States. 2 years in the pivot to the Pacific is well on its way. Economically, negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership continue, and we hope to find an agreement that protects national sovereignty, but at the same time unlocks trade benefits for all. Militarily, more than half of America's naval assets are currently based in Asia. I believe that America will remain a Pacific power. In the medium term, America's continued commitment towards peace, stability, and prosperity is welcomed by many Asian voices who value the friendship built over many years of bilateral and regional relations. But there is also concern that the stage is being set for a new great game that Asia, and in particular East and Southeast Asia, will find itself at the heart of a struggle between rival superpowers. This narrative is attractive to those who think of a multipolar world can only be established through conflict. And when there's conflict, there must be winners and losers, where one hegemony gives way to many. But this need not be the case. Malaysia has strong relationship with both the United States and China, and we have a shared interest in a stable, secure, and peaceful region. The way Asian states interplay with the United States and China will determine whether Asia's rise brings a new era of cooperation and peace. And ASEAN, which speaks for 600 million people, will play a part, a big part, in managing that relationship. The third question concerns Japan and the role it will play in the 21st century. With so much attention focused on India and China, there has been a tendency to forget both Japan's underlying economic strength and its own journey towards regional leadership. The answers to these questions, particularly about the rise of China and the role of the United States, will determine the balance of power in the Asian century. But there are also three key issues which will also influence events in the region and which Asia must address and must confront. The first issue is a series of overlapping territorial claims in the East and South China Seas and the tensions that result from them. The resolution of these claims will be a huge test for Asia, a test of our commitment to peace and of how we find mechanisms for solving conflicts. The second key issue is the rise of militant radicals inspired by religion. The threat of extremism is common to all continents, and Asia is no exception. When religious and territorial differences intersect, the resulting conflict can be particularly potent. In recent years, militancy in southern Philippines spilled over into Sabah or East Malaysia. Ethnic divisions have taken a terrible toll on the Rohingya people of Myanmar, and southern Thailand has been wrecked by a long-running insurgency. These are typical of the non-state threats to Asia's regional stability. Ladies and gentlemen, the way we respond to these issues will determine Asia's future. On the first question, the territorial claims in East and South China Seas, our starting principle should be and must be engagement and dialogue. Confronted with the complex disagreements between states, Asia must place its trust in diplomatic solutions. We must heed the fundamental principles on which good diplomacy is conducted: sovereign equality, respect for territorial integrity, peaceful settlement of disputes, and mutual benefit in relations. And we must affirm our commitment to rule-based solutions to competing claims, international law, and not economic or even worse, military coercion should guide the resolution of disputes over resources. We should also recognize that a divided sea will affect our common prosperity. The South China Sea not only holds significant underwater natural resources, its waves also carry huge amounts of trade. Half the world's oil tanker shipments pass through the South China Sea. It is home to more than half of the world's top 10 shipping ports and carries 5 times more traffic than the Panama Canal. Conflict which threatens freedom of navigation would have profound implications, especially for trade between Asian states. A good starting point is the code of conduct, our best hope for ensuring that disagreements do not escalate. Without meaningful progress on the passage of this code, claimants will explore other means to entrench their positions. Unilateral actions risk hardening national positions, making resolution even more challenging. On the rise of militants and extremists, we should continue to enact norms of Asian diplomacy, which emphasizes background mediation and discussion. As with Cambodia's enrollment in ASEAN and Myanmar's move towards democratization, quiet, constructive engagement, or the so-called ASEAN way, can bring positive results. But we should also be unafraid to pursue new approaches. Our regional agreement on piracy is cited as a strong example of regional cooperation by the International Maritime Organization, which seeks to replicate it elsewhere. The same principles of sharing information and building capacity could be applied to anti-terrorism initiatives, which, despite some headline successes, have sometimes lacked the coordination needed to be truly regional. Malaysia, which has sent humanitarian deployments to Afghanistan, has already played an active role in resolving regional non-state conflicts, helping broker a peace deal to end a brutal insurgency in southern Philippines and taking the first steps towards negotiation in Thailand's restive south. It is this commitment to regional peace through moderation, through negotiation, which underpins our bid for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council for 2015-2016. Ladies and gentlemen, the way we, Asian nations, and our friends and partners in the rest of the world respond to the questions and issues I have raised this evening will determine the course of the so-called Asian century. I believe that by pursuing peace within our borders and cooperation beyond, in our region, and even beyond our region, we can show that Asia's remarkable growth can bring a better world, a safer, more sustainable world. We can honor the promise placed in us by the people of Asia and all those who look to Asia in hope and expectation. I thank you.
Prime Minister Najib, thank you very much for that comprehensive and sweeping address about developments in Asia. For those of us in the Washington policy community, we obviously spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in Asia. And increasingly, I think here in Washington, there is a growing recognition of the significance of Southeast Asia to developments in the Asia-Pacific region. One of the points that we oftentimes make is that there are many key facets of the pivot towards Asia which really run through ASEAN. and run through Malaysia. Let me start this part of the conversation with, we know our president visited Malaysia earlier this year, and in addition to a number of business deals that were signed, et cetera, we know that our two governments moved forward and developed a comprehensive partnership agreement to really kind of deepen and broaden the bilateral relationship. From your perspective, what might you, Malaysia look to see how the U.S.-Malaysia can evolve under this comprehensive partnership agreement going, which is a broad framework that obviously needs to be filled in, but your thoughts on where we can take the relationship going forward?
I think it is a very, very strategic and a very important relationship between Malaysia and the United States. We see the United States as a country which has a lot of strength that underpins this country. For example, being innovative. I think, I like the American spirit of you can do it kind of thing, and if you fail once, it's not failure for the rest of your life. I mean, that innovative spirit and being the source of so much technological advancement, I think that I would like to see Malaysia, being able to benefit from that. For example, that is why we established an office in the Silicon Valley, to tap into that, kind of innovation that the Silicon Valley is famous for. Then, of course, the markets. I think the markets of United States for our products, it's very, very important. And investment, into Malaysia from some of your leading corporations really would really help us in terms of transforming Malaysia to become a fully developed nation by the year 2020. And of course, the other aspect of that relationship, as you said, is a very broad relationship. It encompasses cooperation in the military fields. It also, education underpins it. Of course, I'm very partial now that my two kids are alumni from Georgetown University. And by the way, my wife and I, we are extremely delighted with the quality education that both of them received from this wonderful institution. And I think, Hoyas, you must be equally excited about being here. I think, so we see that relationship broadening and deepening in many, many areas. I can go on, but I think these are some of the significant ones. And of course, we have this challenging thing about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It has its challenges, but if we can agree on the terms, I think it would be mutually beneficial.
I think you raised a good point about the TPP. I took note of this idea of striking a balance between the sovereignty of every country, obviously that's a fundamental principle, but also an agreement that does generate new opportunities, does create more openness, so to speak, for businesses and companies on both sides and all members to be able to participate and take advantage of what really would be a game changer in terms of global trade and investment. I think that'll be significant. Let me turn to another point that you raised about the sort of some of the challenges that you noted that are really fundamental for the Asia-Pacific community to make sure they find the pathways forward. You mentioned, obviously, the South China Sea and issues around sort of territorial disputes, those kinds of questions, which are out there, which can be complex issues. They can be tied to history, et cetera. Now, I know Malaysia has actually also faced similar challenges and has actually found some successful ways to resolve those territorial questions, primarily through the idea of promoting processes that really allow for joint economic development of resources, so that both parties might feel that even if we can't figure it out 100% for indefinite, let us talk about cooperation. Do you think that might be the kinds of approach that could be applied to some of the other challenges in some of these territorial disputes?
It's possible, Mark, but it has to be predicated on some general agreement. Like, for example, we have this joint development with Thailand because, the maritime boundary is, more or less settled. But of course, there is some dispute about the actual, the exact measurement. But the general notion has been accepted. And similarly with Brunei, we have this agreement with Brunei, which is working pretty well. And it was achieved on the basis of negotiations, complex as they may be, but we eventually, took a political decision. We have one which is still unresolved, which is the Sulawesi with Indonesia, and that I hope to be able to discuss with the incoming president. We also have chosen the International Court of Justice in the case of the disputed island with Singapore, and also with Indonesia, Ligitan Sipadan. And we went in on the basis that whatever is decided by the International Court, we will respect that. So there are various mechanisms. Either you take it to ICJ or you negotiate. But important thing is that you must not resort to military coercion, I mentioned, and unilateral action, which will really make it much, much more difficult to resolve. And I think I would like to see that kind of approach taken in the case of, the South China Sea as well, particularly so that as difficult as it is, it has to be predicated on some sort of general principles. I think the notion that we must respect the rule of law, international law, has to be one of the bases. You can't just sort of say, look, I want this area or I claim this area. There must be some basis for it, And for as long as we are rational in our approach, and not do anything that will sacrifice the bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture is that, this is a region of prosperity. The engine of growth basically is coming from Asia. And we shouldn't undermine that. I think that is the big picture. And within that, I think if we put our minds to it, eventually we will find a solution.
In your remarks also, Prime Minister, you mentioned ASEAN, a region of over 600 million people, combined GDP of over $2 trillion, basically the Asia-Pacific's leading regional economic hub. Oftentimes, we don't talk enough about ASEAN here in the United States, but looking forward, Malaysia is going to take over the chairmanship of ASEAN in 2015, which also happens to be the same year that the ASEAN Economic Community will be formally launched in December 31st. You've spoken already about some of the things that Malaysia thinks would be very valuable to sort of try to promote the ASEAN economic integration agenda, to be more inclusive, for example, to make it a bit more bottom-up and not just simply a top-down project. Are these some of the kinds of things that you envision when Malaysia is in that chairmanship role, that Malaysia will try to urge the region to think about some of these approaches?
Indeed, Mark. We will embark on what we call the ASEAN or the people-centered approach, because relevance of ASEAN to the only people in ASEAN, I think it's not quite there yet. Level of awareness, appreciation, importance of ASEAN. So we have to have many, many programs that will really, touch, to have the skin feeling, if you like, of the ordinary people in the ASEAN countries. So we have in mind, for example, to have entrepreneurship development, SME development connected to that. Most of the enterprises in ASEAN are SMEs and micro enterprises. So the opportunity to develop entrepreneurship skills, which we can connect with the global entrepreneurship initiative started by President Obama, which he launched during his visit in Malaysia. So all these things we have in mind to embark on programs that will really be more relevant, to the people of ASEAN.
And then I think a final question just for this conversation. In your remarks, you did note again, we are living in a time of some turmoil. In some regards, we do see situations of, again, religious intolerance or religious extremists seem to be the basis for conflicts. I know, Prime Minister, you've spoken a lot about perhaps the need for countries to come together around almost like an international movement around religious moderation and tolerance. And as you go to the UN this week, perhaps take a seat on the Security Council. Is that the kind of thing that you would see those platforms that Malaysia would really try to push for? As we talk about today, we're actually having armed conflict in the Middle East as we speak.
I think we can add value to the ongoing debate and concern about what's happening in the Middle East. We can provide how Islam is applied in a very plural society. And I don't think you can get more plural than a Malaysian society. And you can see the, 40, almost more than 40 years of peace and stability in Malaysia is something that we're proud of. We're proud of the fact that we've been able to enjoy religious freedom in Malaysia. At the same time, we are committed to the fundamental tenets of Islam. That Islam is inherently a very peaceful, moderate, and tolerant religion. That really is the key principles, which unfortunately, those people who are committing those horrific acts today, they don't speak for us. And I've been on record to say that the so-called ISIL, by the way, I won't call them ISIL because they're un-Islamic. And they're also not a state. I said, whatever they are, and whatever actions they've done, they are against Islam, they're against God, and they're against humanity. Those are very, very clear, explicit, positions, and we like to take the position of Islam as a modern, progressive, tolerant religion for peace, for justice. And that's our brand of Islam. And that is the brand that we want to bring to the table. That's the brand we want to speak to the world and show the world that, whatever faith you adhere to, we can all work towards global peace and prosperity.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for that. Let me invite our Michelle to join us here.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Mealy, for this wonderful conversation. The Prime Minister has graciously agreed to open to a time of question and answer session. Every single audience member needs to line up at the microphone in the center aisle. Every audience member is allowed one question. Please keep your questions short so that others may have the opportunity to ask questions. So, thank you.
I know we're here at Georgetown, so I know there's not a shyness of students who might want to ask a question. Okay.
Please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Good evening and salam satu Malaysia, Datuk Seri.
Yep.
My name is Billy Hu. I'm a first-year MPP student at the McCart School of Public Policy. I do research on brain drain, and over the past year, I studied the inclinations of Malaysian students in the United States to return back to Malaysia after they complete their education here. Interestingly, I've discovered that internship opportunities back home can actually help make the students here more inclined to return home. However, through my internship in Talent Corporation this summer, I've actually found out that there's actually a lack of visibility between students abroad and companies back home when it comes to internship opportunities. So from a public policy standpoint, I would like to have your opinion. What can Malaysia do to address this gap? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very relevant question because brain drain is our concern because you have to talk in terms of intellectual capital, and for a country to progress, it has to be founded on enriching your intellectual capital, skills, and this is one of those things that I'll be addressing in the forthcoming budget. I also agree with you. The Malaysian corporations, both the private sector and the public GLCs, government-linked companies, must do more to provide training opportunities. We want to encourage them to do more. We have established this talent corporation, and that's a starting point for you to explore opportunities in Malaysia. And that shows our seriousness in trying to bring home talents from overseas. And we like to do more. And this is work in progress, actually. And I'd like to see more work to be done to attract some of the brightest minds, Malaysians to come back home, and even foreigners to work in Malaysia. Because there are some jobs that, you need foreigners as well. I think let's face it, the more open a society is, the more progressive society is going to be. And one of the reasons why America has been so successful over the years is because America is an open society. The moment you close up America, you will not get the benefit of that flow of talent, ideas, and the people with a kind of dynamism to succeed. So Malaysia, we are serious about it, and I agree with you. We need to do even more.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Maksoud. I'm a graduate student at the Security Studies program. Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned in your introduction the political and security issues that Myanmar is currently going through. My question, drawing on your experience, is related to Myanmar's current educational crisis. As you might know, the study of political science is still banned, despite huge demand for that area, and Yangon University has only recently opened up after decades of closure. What advice would Malaysia provide to Myanmar, and what kinds of initiatives is Malaysia engaged in or could be engaged in to support the country in this not just political and security transition, but also a major educational area transition?
We're part of ASEAN, and I alluded to this, the ASEAN way. Some people have been critical. The ASEAN way is a very, very slow, ponderous way of doing things. But in the case of Myanmar, eventually it was successful. I mean, they're on this road, which is irreversible road towards a more open and democratic society. But I would also agree that they have to accelerate the pace. I will have to play my part as well, I suppose, when we assume the chair of ASEAN. They have their challenges back home because there are elements as well, more conservative elements. But Thein Sein, the president of Myanmar, is someone who's committed to reforms. And I think if we can urge him, support him, and not isolate him, encourage him, I think he will be emboldened to do more. And I would, try to play my part. I cannot obviously do it alone, but I think as more and more countries and other leaders support him, encourage him, and I think you will probably see the pace of change accelerate a bit. It is moving, but it should move even faster. And I think opening up the education system and allowing intellectual pursuit, I think, is key to changing Myanmar and making Myanmar a much, much better country.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for coming to Georgetown. My name is Roe Haydar. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service. And I just want to say I've been to Malaysia a few years ago, and I've seen firsthand sort of the way that multiple communities have been living together and how there's been economic development. I have to say good job with that. However, I did like when in your speech you mentioned Malaysia as part of the list of free societies in Southeast Asia, and I was wondering how you consider Malaysia to be a free society when there's still preferential treatment given to ethnic Malay people over other populations, and when it's been ruled by one party since the start, and also when, in light of the heavy media censorship that has been going on in your country.
You see, in terms of civil liberties in Malaysia, I'm introduced a lot of reforms in Malaysia, and one of the things I did when I took over office was to abolish the Internal Security Act, which is detention without trial. That's a huge leap forward because I'm someone who believes in the rule of law. And the emergency proclamation, for example, the Banishment Act that was introduced during the days when we fought the communists by the Brits and all that, those have already been expunged and no longer part of a Malaysian law. So if you consider what is happening today, including the Freedom to Assembly Act, taken as a whole, is a huge, it's the biggest reform in terms of civil liberties ever done in Malaysia. But we do have some way to go before we can have a society which is perhaps we won't consider as a fully matured society, because we need to have this balance, if you like, between the various ethnic communities in Malaysia. It's a very delicate thing, because if you don't have a balanced society, for example, if you don't share wealth equitably, and if there's serious inequality of wealth, it leads to, eventually it leads to political instability. So a lot of other countries have done what we call affirmative action as well. In other countries, affirmative action is addressed against or for the sake of minorities, for example. In the case of Malaysia, it is the majority who are left behind economically, and we need to redress it. But as long as we see results, those policies can be reviewed as time goes on. And I think, for example, opportunities, going to universities is much, much more open today than ever before. We've created more private universities. So if you see the society in Malaysia, it's trying to manage this ethnic balance in a way that we will not have one community feeling unhappy. For as long as we can try to share the wealth, create more opportunities, I think we can ensure the society will be a society that can live in harmony with one another. I'm not apologetic about one party being in power, because there is democracy in Malaysia. It's an open society. You just have to have access to social media. And you know that with social media, the balance has tilted in favor of those who do not control the mainstream newspapers. Even opposition parties, they have their own newspaper. Opposition parties have rallies as well. And in fact, they do more rallies than the ruling party. I can assure you, every night they are having rallies. So in Malaysia, it's pretty open. And I hope you will spend more time in Malaysia. And I can assure you, you will see that it's a much more open society than you think.
I look forward to coming back. Thanks for the response.
Please do come to Malaysia again.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm a freshman from the business school, and I'm from China. I'm just wondering, what advice would you give to the young people of Asia in general?
Yeah, that's a hard question, isn't it? I'm not sure what advice I give to my own children. But really, Asia is a continent of opportunities, I think. I think that's the key. And it's not many parts of the world in which you can ask a young person, do you feel more optimistic about the future or not? And I think if I ask this question, most people in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, I'm not saying all, but most, I think, would say that, look, they feel more optimistic about the future. And I think the future is bright. It's just that, you have to make most of the opportunities. And at this stage, I'd like to see more the young people to be to learn as much as they can. Skills, I think, knowledge and skills, are the key ingredients. And the opportunity given through the openness in our society back home and opportunities to learn overseas, I think it's a golden opportunity for you to equip yourself and to succeed in a very, very competitive world. And I think coupled with the spirit that we can succeed, we have this expression in Malaysia called Malaysia Boleh, which can do. Yes, we can. I think Obama learned from us. Or at least I like to claim so. That kind of spirit, I think we will succeed, and every individual will succeed. And it's my duty as Prime Minister of Malaysia to ensure every Malaysian will have a rightful place under the Malaysian sun.
First of all, thank you very much.
Sorry, you have to bend down a bit.
First of all, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for coming and speaking to us. My name's Marco. I'm a freshman here at the SFS. I'm originally from Switzerland. I have a question which gets asked a lot. I was wondering what you think about it. You mentioned your wish to see Malaysia occupy a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council next year. Do you believe that there should be more permanent reform, particularly to do with Security Council membership, to reflect the pivot we're experiencing? And if not, would you say the UN risks even becoming obsolete?
Very topical. Reform of the United Nations is something that we have called for a long time. I think the current structure, which is really a throwback of the world after the Second World War, cannot be something that will reflect the world today. I mean, if you take the big picture, and neither will it be able to, reflect the changing world, the multipolar world in the years to come. And the predominance of the Perm 5 in decision-making, the veto power, has been one of those things, has been a problem, a bane, in terms of the Security Council being able to act effectively as a platform. And I think the general principle of the United Nations to be more democratic. There are, I don't know how many countries around the world, 180 countries around the world. I mean, the destiny of 180 countries cannot rest with just the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. There must be some sort of, way in which the smaller nations can be counted as well, Not only Malaysia, but maybe St. Vincent with a population of 50,000, or the Maldives, which is sinking. They want a bigger say in the running of world affairs. But, quite often, the voices of the smaller countries are not really heard and being able to be translated into actions by the world community. So I think in general, I would say, a greater democratization of the United Nations is long overdue. But unfortunately, reality is that the Perm 5 will have to agree. And the Perm 5 will never agree to something that will dilute their influence in the United Nations. And that's the reality of it. So we're stuck. You know, as much as we know we need to reform, but you have to tell people, the powers that be today that, hey, you know, it's a different world today. So you have to give up some of your influence and agree on a more democratic United Nations.
Thank you very much.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Alia Shaiful. I'm a junior at American University, and I have a question about the education sector in Malaysia. I know we have Sekolah Jenis Tamil, Sekolah Jenis Cina. Do you think it's best to abolish these schools in order to foster a more diverse and more multicultural education system that will carry on till the tertiary level by starting in primary and trying to make sure that the Chinese, Indians, and Malays can work together in one education community? Or should we still continue to have all these kind of divisions within the education sector?
Do you want a political reply? You want an honest reply? If you think about it, you know, for us to appreciate one another, we all should study together under one roof. Really, I mean, the very fact that you know, you're able to have such a diverse community here, Georgetown University, speaks for itself. You know, you appreciate each other better if you study. You study together, you play together, you do things together. But the reality of it is that, you know, once we have created the schools, you know, to change and to say, look, you have to give up something and accept a national type school, then you will enter into the realm of a very contentious debate. And I know in education, being a former Minister of Education, and we have a Minister of Education here in the audience, that everyone is an expert in education. You can never win an argument, okay? The political reality is that we have inherited our forefathers. You see, what is interesting in Malaysia, if you look at the history, how Malaysia was formed, it was formed on a basis of integration, not assimilation. We are different from all the other Southeast Asian countries. Thailand, Indonesia, for example, Philippines, they went for assimilation. We went for integration. That when we integrate, we're going to have you know, a very diverse society. Even their names will be different, culturally will be different, religious, the way of life will be different. And part of that, we also gave their own schools. And in Singapore, for example, Kuan Yew closed down Chinese schools. In Singapore, he did that. But there will be, you know, there will be a political turmoil in Malaysia. We will try to do that, isn't it, today? So it's not really an ideal situation, but it's something that we have to make the most of in Malaysia. And I hope that despite the fact that we are in different streams, if you like, we can still try to inculcate the values of tolerance, of mutual respect, of celebrating diversity, for example. These are very, very important values that we must pass on, you know, to the young generation, despite the fact that we are having different types of school. It's something that we cannot change, something that we will not try to change. It's something that we will try to make the most of it. And we're, as a nation, based on our track record, we're not doing too badly in terms of, you know, managing a plural society. Would you agree with that? It's, you know, it's, you don't have to say yes, but Michelle, you don't have to say yes. But look, you know, if you look in Malaysia, there's many countries less complex than Malaysia. in a worse position. So on that basis, you know, I'm still optimistic about the future of Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Mealy, for this wonderful night. It's certainly been a very amazing experience for all of us, and we thank you again for coming to Georgetown University. If you would like to learn more about the lecture fund, please visit our website or like us on Facebook. And yes, we ask that all audience members remain seated until the stage participants and the Malaysian delegation leaves Gaston Hall. And let's give Mr. Prime Minister Najib Razak another round of applause.
Thanks, Mark.